Chapter 3 Firing Parties.
It was a shaken group of scientists that moved off in their jeeps to the pre-selected stations. Most of the adults had experienced earthquakes before, but none had seen the earth split open almost at their feet. To Rick, the sensation had been as upsetting as any he had ever experienced.
"The one thing we learned to depend on," Zirkin said, "is that the earth under our feet is solid and dependable. When it shakes like jelly, it causes a kind of emotional shock, apart from any physical damage it may do."
"It certainly did with me," Rick agreed. "Ditto," Scotty added. Zirkin put the jeep in gear and moved away from the hotel. He drove slowly over the narrow part of the crack in the parking lot, then picked up speed. Rick looked around. Bradley, Connell, and Ruiz were following in their own vehicle. Zirkin took a blacktop road to the west, close to the base of the mountain. Fortunately for Rick's peace of mind, the road was fairly smooth. He had never carried dynamite caps before, but he knew they contained fulminate of mercury, which is one of the most unstable and violent chemical substances, pound for pound, ever created. The big scientist sensed his uneasiness.
"Relax, Rick. Those caps won't go off without a substantial knock against something. Enjoy the scenery."
Rick grinned. "I'll try." The scenery was tropical. Once away from the hotel grounds, there was heavy growth, vines, creepers, and broad-leafed plants. He saw palmetto and wild banana interspersed with Judas palms and other typical vegetation. The growth clung to the side of El Viejo like a thick green carpet. Now and then the jeep passed an open space in the vegetation, and he saw the plains stretching away to the sea on his left. The jeep climbed gradually, and Rick realized that their direction had changed. They were now heading on a more northerly course. The vegetation was thinner, too, and he guessed it was because they were higher up on the mountainside. At a rough estimate, the jeep had climbed nearly 1,000 feet.
"Pumice quarry ahead,"
Zirkin announced. Rick saw ramshackle wooden buildings, then piles of grayish rock. 100 yards farther on, he saw an open pit. This was where the San Luisians mined pumice for export. "Is there much of a market for it?" Scotty asked.
"Not as much as there was years ago," Zirkin replied. "Pumice, as you probably know, is volcanic rock, but not an ordinary one. It's kind of foamy lava, honeycombed with gas bubbles. It's used as an abrasive. Modern industrial products have replaced it in general use, but apparently there's still enough demand, so the San Luisians are able to export a little. Our firing station is about a mile from here." Rick looked at the rough terrain. "You think we can get through?" "Easily. According to the map, we have an unpaved road part of the way."
The unpaved road turned out to be more like a pair of wagon tracks, but at least there were no trees in the way. Rick held on tight as Zirkin shifted into four-wheel drive and forged ahead. The big scientist kept an eye on his odometer, or mileage counter, while the boys watched for a clearing. It was slightly over a mile before they found one, and Zirkin pulled off the road to let Brad, Connell, and Ruiz go by. The jeep stopped as the two came abreast, and the geologist called. "Want to trade stations?" "We like this one," Zirkin replied with a grin. "Don't blame you. I have another 3 miles through this stuff. Well, so long." The jeep started off and was soon lost as the path curved slightly. Zirkin looked at his watch. "Plenty of time, but we might as well get ready." A few minutes' search disclosed a spot far enough away from the clearing for safety, with no trees to be uprooted by the blast. Zirkin took 2 of the dynamite sticks Rick carried, and 1 of the blasting caps. He placed the cap over one stick and used a special tool, like a jar opener, to crimp it into place.
"This is the only really delicate part of the operation," he said. "If the crimpers slip, they could set off the cap and the dynamite. So be careful when you do it. Keep the crimpers low on the flange of the cap."
He found a rubber band in his pocket and used it to hold the 2 sticks together.
A coil of wire was produced next, and the connection was made to the dynamite cap. Zircon dug a shallow hole with his heel and put the dynamite sticks in, then backed off, unwinding wire as he went. The detonator had been left in the Jeep. Rick got it and carried it to where Zircon waited with the pairs of wires. "How does that thing work?" Scotty asked. "It's a dynamo," Zircon replied. "When the handle is pushed down, it engages gears that spin a flywheel, which operates the dynamo long enough to send an electrical charge through the wires." "So don't sit on the handle," Rick joked. "And don't kick it," Scotty added. Zircon connected the wires to a pair of terminals on top of the detonator, then looked at his watch. "Plenty of time. We might as well take it easy. Anyone hungry?" No one was. It was too soon after breakfast. Instead, Rick took the opportunity to ask questions. "I can understand the general principle of what we're doing, but can you tell us exactly what's happening?" "Sure. When the dynamite charge goes off, it sends shock waves through the earth in all directions. Whenever a shock wave strikes something of different density, its direction and velocity change. For instance, if there is a denser rock layer a few hundred feet down, this will cause a change of both velocity and direction in the shock wave from the blast. With me so far?" "I think so," Scotty said. "The denser the stuff the wave strikes, the faster it will move. Like sound waves. Sound waves move faster in water than in air, and faster in a steel rail than in water. Is that the same?" "Just about," Zircon agreed. "The shock waves radiate away from us, through the earth, and eventually reach the recorders on the other side of the mountain. You can see what happens, I think. Waves will arrive at different times, depending on the path they took and the kind of material they went through." Rick nodded. "So, if there's molten rock or magma somewhere in the way, the shock wave that goes through it will slow down and arrive at the recorder later." "That's about the size of it. The tracings we get can be analyzed to give us a kind of cross-section look at the mountain. You see, we know how fast the waves travel through different kinds of Earth structure. Also, we will know the point of the explosion and the location of the recorder for each shot. Which reminds me, we better get out the equipment and locate ourselves precisely." "How?" Rick asked. "What will we use for landmarks?" "Well, the top of the mountain, for one. And if you look carefully to a point slightly south of east, between those two banana palms, you'll see the top of the control tower at the airport." Rick shook his head. "Good thing you're with us. I completely forgot to watch for landmarks." "That was the first thing I had in mind when I looked for a spot," Zircon told him. The transit, like a telescope, gave a precise angle between the two landmarks. Zircon drew a line on the map connecting the southern tip of the mountain and the airport tower. Then, with that as his baseline, it was easy to draw two lines at the correct angles from each of the points. The transit's position was where the two lines intersected. That was their location on the map. By the time the scientist had finished, it was nearly 1 o'clock. The three walked to the detonator. "Pull the handle up," Zircon directed. Rick did so. "I'll count down from 10 seconds. Push it down when I get to 0. It was like the countdown for a rocket firing, Rick thought. Zircon called out the time starting at 1 minute, then called off the last 10 seconds. As he reached 0, Rick pushed the handle down. The dynamite went off with a roar that sent leaves and dirt flying, and Rick felt the shock waves slam against his ears with stunning force. "Open your mouth next time," Zircon said. "Sorry, I forgot to warn you." He was already reeling in wire. "Let's get going, 1 mile farther on for the next shot." At the next station, the same procedure was repeated, but before it was time, there was a far-off explosion. Zircon looked at his watch. Brad Connell, right on time for his first shot. In another 15 minutes, there was an even more distant sound as David Riddle's first shot went off. They ate their lunch and listened to the echo off the mountain. Zircon and the boys were ready when their time came. The location this time had been made on sightings towards the mountain and a flagpole at Cape San Souci on the western side of the island. The road petered out and they were forced to go cross country to reach the third shot station. Fortunately, Brad Connell had left a path of crushed vegetation, so it was only necessary to follow where he had led. After the third shot, the three collected their equipment and drove back to the hotel. They were the first back. All three were sticky from the heat and somewhat insect-bitten. By unanimous consent, they headed for the showers. Rick dressed, except for his shoes, then stretched out on his bed. He wondered what the day's work would show. The memory of the earthquake was still fresh, and he was anxious to see if it had come from rising magma far below or from some other source. He had a mental image of white-hot rock rising sluggishly, melting a path to the surface. Now and then the magma struck water or gas-producing minerals, and then there was a tightly held explosion that made the earth shudder. Well, it was probably like that from what he had read about volcanic action. Anyway, he could do without earthquakes. They were unnerving. Scotty finished dressing, and Rick slipped on his shoes. It was time for the others to be back. Connell should have arrived only a few minutes behind them, but it would take longer for the others because they had gone around the mountain in the other direction. The boys walked to the staff conference room and found Hartson Brandt and Julius Weiss. The two were busy unrolling long strips of paper covered with blue shadings. "Find anything yet?" Rick asked his father. "No, we're just getting ready to take a look." "How did it go?" "No trouble. Zircon must still be in the shower. Probably Connell is, too. He must have been right behind us." The scientists stared, poring over the traces. "Here's your first shot," Hartson Brandt said. He pointed to where a series of squiggles began. Rick could see nothing of interest. All the pen marks looked about the same to him. It would take an expert to analyze this and make anything out of it. The boys left the scientists to their work and wandered out into the parking lot. "I want to take a closer look at that crack," Rick said. "Same here. You think it goes to China?" Rick grinned at his pal. "That's a myth. If you drill a hole straight down through the center of the earth, you won't come out anywhere near China. You'd be in the southern hemisphere." "Don't get technical on me, boy." The crack, however, went down only about 3 feet, gradually narrowing until it was closed. Even so, it was impressive. Rick knew that the actual break must continue down into the earth for some distance, perhaps hundreds of feet. The force it took to shake the earth like that was awesome. Again, he was reminded sharply of the kind of forces against which the Spindrift group was trying to contend, and he felt for the first time that the job might be completely hopeless. What could mere men do against such forces? A horn honking wildly brought him to quick attention. He turned and saw a jeep coming around the western road into the parking lot. Brad Connell! But where was Ruiz? Then, as the jeep neared, Rick saw. The San Lucian was lashed to an improvised stretcher lying across the back of the jeep. The geologist drew to a stop, his face chalky. "Get a doctor!" he shouted. "Quickly! Ruiz got caught in the last explosion. I think he's dead."